Hey everyone, today we are going to be solving ratio problems using tape diagrams. So we are going to solve ratios in a couple of different ways. In the next couple of days, we're going to be focusing specifically on tape diagrams. So in the first examples that I have here, we are going to create a couple of tape diagrams so you know how to create them and you know what each of the parts of the tape diagram represent. So in example number 1, it says the ratio of smiles to frowns is 5:3. Create a tape diagram to represent the ratio. The first thing I would like you to do is I would like you to create 3 spaces. We're going to call this part 1, part 2, and whole. Because when we look at ratios, each ratio has 2 parts and it makes up a whole. And the 2 parts should always add up to the whole. In this particular ratio, it says the ratio of smiles to frowns. So I'm going to say that smiles is first, frowns is part 2, and I'm going to call this whole total faces. And now that I've got those named, I'm going to associate numbers with those names. So there are 5 smiles, 3 frowns, and if I add these 2 parts together, I get 8 total faces. Again, my 2 parts should always add up to my whole. Now I'm going to create the tape diagram that goes with this. The cool thing about labeling parts and wholes is this is how many pieces my tape diagram should be. So when I create my tape diagram, I'm literally going to create something that looks like a piece of tape. So just a big rectangle. And I know that this whole rectangle needs to be cut into 8 pieces because that's what the whole is. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You want to make these boxes as even as you possibly can, but we all know that we're not perfect, so they're not going to be perfectly even, and that's okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I am going to create a break where my ratio is. So I need 5 smiles and 3 frowns. So I'm going to count 5 boxes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm actually going to draw a line through the boxes there to say that the first part represents the smiles and the second part represents the frowns. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to label those 2 things. So the left-hand side I'm going to label with smiles, and the right-hand side I'm going to label with frowns. Okay, so this is how you create a tape diagram. This is a part-to-part ratio. So I already had the 2 parts, and then I can use the whole to help me create the entire tape diagram. In example 2, it says 2 out of 5 students play soccer at LMS. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the words out of, because out of means that this is a part and this is a whole. We talked about that with part to whole ratios in the first section, where there is, when we talk about explaining the meaning of a part to whole ratio, we use the words out of. So now when we see the words out of, we are automatically going to associate that with part to whole. So when I do my part 1, part 2, and whole, my part 1 is going to be the students that play soccer. And my whole is going to be total students. And they don't tell me what part 2 is, but I can figure out what part 2 is based on what part 1 is. So if part 1 is kids that play soccer, part 2 is kids that don't play soccer. Now, when I put my numbers in, it says 2 out of 5 students play soccer at LMS. So 2 of these students play soccer out of 5 total students. And then my 2 parts need to add up to my whole. So my other part here is going to be 3. because 2 plus 3 is 5. Now, if this is a part to whole tape diagram, I know that my whole tape diagram needs to be 5 pieces. So when I create my little tape diagram here, I'm going to cut this into 5 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? And now I'm going to, again, grab that pen that's going to break my ratio into the 2 parts. I know that 2 students play soccer, so after 1, 2 boxes, I'm going to draw a line for those 2 students. And these 2 students play soccer. And then the 3 over here don't play soccer. Okay. And then the 5 boxes represents my total students. Okay, so this is how to create a tape diagram. We're going to identify part 1, part 2, and whole. The whole tells us how big our tape diagram is supposed to be, how many boxes we need to break it into total. And then we're going to break it for the 2 parts of the ratio. So you're going to be identifying both the parts and the whole every single time.